All right, so we're gonna get started. I have a lot of questions. This is the first time I've ever printed anything out on a piece of paper.
Oh my God, so official.
It's very official. So,
Can I just say that I'm really glad to be with Nick because this guy got me my job at the New York Times and was writing his Twitter book when I was wanting to write a book and whatever. And so this guy was like the tech reporter that I was looking up to for a long time. So it is awesome to be here right now.
now I want to write an Uber book and be like Mike. All right, so let's jump in. So, did Travis talk to you for the book or no?
Travis did not want this book to be written. We did not talk for the book.
Did you reach out to him and he like sent a like bloody fish in your bed or something like that? Like
I definitely. I mean, I did. I wanted to. I don't know. I mean, I'm curious. When you wrote Twitter, like, I'd be curious to hear about your experience, but I know you did not get a lot of cooperation, right?
I didn't at first, but then eventually
and then you
I
have
did.
leverage to come in. So I didn't get, like, Travis didn't want me to write this book. He, like, the whole thing was just sort of, he wanted 2017 to go away, and his whole thing is like, you know, I got pushed out in a really ugly way, but I'm going to try to make my comeback and go underground and do his next startup, and that's definitely like a smart PR strategy probably. But I tried to get it. But I also have like, I also kind of, sometimes I think that not having everyone on board can make it better, if you know?
Without a doubt. I mean, the thing that's so fascinating is these guys are so powerful and so rich, and yet they're afraid of a few words on a page. I always find that fascinating. When you were kind of approaching the story, there's already been a million stories which you had written and a lot of other people had written about all the chaos there. How did you approach the story from a point of view where you were like, okay, I'm going to make this fresh and new and different for everyone who's been reading the news every day?
No, I mean, that's the cool part is like, okay, you have to now deliver a book. But I feel like you know, people kind of knew, at least in some degree, that Uber was having a rough year for a while, or at least, you know, maybe had this nebulous idea that it was doing bad things as a company. But I felt like there was so much left out of, you know, I've been writing on Uber since 2014, and as a reporter, I guess there's just so much you leave on the cutting room floor, I guess, you know, when you're doing stories, especially for a newspaper. Like you have like a 1,200 word story where you can make your one point, or maybe you have like a 3,000 word feature where you can say this about this person or whatever. But I really think the story of Uber kind of paralleled a lot of different larger themes in tech that I think we're seeing play out right now, and in the, you know, having like 90,000 whatever, you know, tens of thousands of words to do that was, ooh, that's for Travis.
That's Travis coming for you. Quick, everyone run!
No, I mean, I just thought there was more space to do it, and it's hard because you have to make it like new, but also, you know, stretch your legs and try to tell a good story. And like there was so much here. That's the thing. Like there are so many good characters here, and it's really a good story.
So I wrote a book about a rich white guy who was a jerk, and at the end of the book, after it was published, he was still a rich white guy who was a jerk, and it was a little disheartening for me because I was like, oh, the truth is out there, and you know, he still went on to do great things, if you want to call him that.
He's the CEO of Twitter now, right?
He's the CEO of Twitter again, and Square. When your story's a little different. I mean, there are huge repercussions, of course, for Twitter and Donald Trump and all those other things, and the good and bad. But with Uber, there was this epic fall. There were people who died. There was all these different things.
Yeah.
What was the thing that you really wanted people to come away from when they read the book?
I think the upshot of a book is like how this. I mean, I use this phrase in the book, and then I guess in my reporting, just like the idea of the cult of the founder, right? Like this idea that like the founder is this godhead figure, and like creating a company is like the end all be all thing. And like, to be clear, like I think what I try to get to in the book is like creating a company is really hard. everything is stacked against you. You're probably going to fail. You're going up against incumbents that don't want you to succeed or whatever. So it's like, I get why this, cheerleader mentality is around, founder worship and like sort of praising someone who starts a company. But I think the culture of the Valley kind of took that and ran with it to an insane degree over the past like 15, 20 years, and kind of justified behaviors that maybe in the name of progress or in the spirit of like saying we're trying to change things for the better, could also justify like really awful things that are happening. And I think it's a book that looks at unintended side effects, and like we should absolutely be looking at like if there's progress, there's also all this other stuff happening over here that we should pay attention to.
So I remember I interviewed Walter Isaacin after the Steve Jobs book came out, and he told me the story of Steve Jobs at the the Moscone Center where they do there's the hotel.
Apple events or whatever.
Yeah, but there's the hotel right next to it, like the Four Seasons, I think it is. Yeah. So Walter and Steve go and they get breakfast, and Steve Jobs is a total jerk to the waitress because he asks for freshly squeezed orange juice, and she keeps bringing him orange juice that is not exactly to his liking. He sends it back like 4 times. And Walter says to him, like, why are you being such a jerk?
Right.
And he's like, one of my roles here on this planet, talk about being egotistical, but is to make people be the best that they can be, whether it's building an iPhone or bringing freshly squeezed orange juice. And it's an amazing story. And Walter, I don't think really liked him after that moment. And one of the people you talk about with Travis, I mean, there's also there's always the myth of Steve Jobs in Silicon Valley, but there's now become kind of the myth of Jeff Bezos. And Travis idolized Jeff Bezos.
Yeah.
And I've kind of flip-flopped on how I feel about him. On the one part, like, great CEO, who's built this amazing company. On the other part, like, look at all the terrible things he's done too. Why do you think it is? Do you think that these CEOs have like some sort of personality disorder, or is this
Your
a good
thesis
thing?
was, is Travis a sociopath?
Well, the question, I guess, is are they all sociopaths?
No. I feel like Jobs was, it was weird. I was doing a event with Roger McNamee, who just wrote this book called Zucked. He's like a character, but he was talking about how like what the Valley was like back in the day, and like let's say building these bicycles for the mine. It was about the tech, and it was about like the product, right? And I think that's shifted. I really do think. A lot of attention is paid to Steve Jobs, but I think he became something larger for a generation of founders that came up over the past like 20 years or so. And like you kind of have to, and I get it, right? You have to, you need a role model or an archetype to kind of live up to, or, if you're a young technologist and you don't really have like obvious heroes, maybe Steve Jobs, who was instrumental in changing a lot of how we operate with the world, like could be that sort of figurehead. But I think it creates this weird complex where everyone feels like they have to have a cult of personality or have to, just sort of do these sort of weird moonshot things or justify their own, ego-feeding stuff that I don't think is always positive.
Do you think that if you were to take like any person in the room and put them in charge of Uber, that they would they feel guilty about some of the decisions the company made? You see what I'm saying? Like I come back to like these ideas of shortchanging drivers. I mean, we'll get into like some of the things that happened in Brazil and places like that, but it seems like there are these incredibly unethical things that happened under Travis's watch, and he just says, well, this is just the way business works.
I think the thinking, and this is even when I get into like fights on Twitter with people, which I don't recommend doing. but I think the thinking really is like, look, we are on our way to a better version of reality, and like shit is gonna go bad in the meantime, or like we're gonna, whatever metaphor you want to use, we're gonna break some eggs, or we're gonna like do some stuff that is not great, but the end goal is like a greater outcome, so you just sort of have to like trust me here, and that's that sort of, I mean, it's really just end justifies the means stuff. And I think that played out inside of Uber a lot of different ways. I mean, the thing is, like, this book is about Uber, but I feel like it's just a lot about a certain type of tech thinking that became very pervasive and really crystallized in this company. It is now just starting to break apart a little bit more as we get into this era of whatever you're gonna call it, techlash or something, you know?
So I just read a story that Travis has this new startup called Cloud Kitchens, and he wants it to replace, I think this is a quote, he wants it to make grocery stores and restaurants obsolete. I mean, way to think small. But he's
and it's based in LA too.
It's based in LA.
Here, yeah.
And he'll probably put a horse head in my bed one of these days. But he's worth $4 billion.
Yeah.
What is that personality?
Well, I like to your earlier point, like the outcome of books, or like what is the sort of, okay, so what of this all, right? Like, okay, I told a story of like, wow, look at all this gnarly hubris and all this bad stuff that this company did. But at the same time, like, Travis is a billionaire multiple times over. He's still investing in companies alongside of Sequoia. He's like welcome to the Met Gala in New York, or I think it was the Met Gala in New York, right? Like, it's like not ostracized from, as if you have, you know, what Travis called, he was introduced into the 3 Comma Club, which is a thing from Silicon Valley. Like, he actually said that out loud to his friends. If you have enough money, I feel like it just sort of, you have the gravitas to sort of stick around. So the thing I've been struggling with is like what the lesson is. Is it that...
The lesson for him or in general?
The lesson for people. Like, does bad behavior ultimately get rewarded, or does it get sort of like justified in the end?
Well, I think it depends what your idea of a reward is, right? I think for them, what I found so fascinating covering these people for 15 years is that they don't seem happy, ever. Nothing is ever enough. Jeff Bezos, the richest guy in the world, still gets up at 5 a.m. and goes into work every day wanting to destroy another industry because it's just not enough. And that's like, it's a little sociopathic. Just throwing that out there.
See, I think another person would say driven, right?
Driven. Sound like Travis. So when you look at so Uber's in a little bit of trouble right now. Is that correct? Would you say that?
Yeah, I think we're in a period now where the dream is being deflated, or this sort of like, I think it's far easier to be a private company than it is to be a public company, and have everyone sort of look at how much money you're losing regularly and wonder when you're going to start making money. So yeah.
And is this the kind of grow, this is the repercussion?
I just think, I feel like, I mean, I'm curious to hear what anyone in the audience thinks, just because I'm assuming there's some tech folks here, but like, I do feel like, you know, for a very long time, grow now, you know, user growth now, revenue growth, or revenue and even profitability is sort of an afterthought, right? Like, that's kind of the business model. And I get that, but I feel like Uber was that kind of on steroids, right? Like, Uber was just only about growth and could always, I think one of Travis's big mistakes was that he always felt like he could always outraise his competitors and raise so much more money because there was always like a wealth of capital around. But now we're in a point where, at least specific to Uber, they have competitors on every major continent, at least, that they compete on, and companies like SoftBank are coming in and like really distorting how long some companies should be around, you know, maybe like throwing in a couple $1 billion into a company that otherwise would have died before, you know. So I think the dynamics have really changed from the time that Uber was coming up. But now the meme on Wall Street, at least, is like, look, we're tired of seeing brutal losses. Even Masa, the SoftBank founder, like, is saying, like, we're tired of insane losses. You need to start actually turning a profit and like proving that you're a business at some point. That feels new. That feels new, at least in tech valuations, tech companies.
The flattening of them and everything.
Yeah, just the idea that, you know, you can't sort of live on growth and 40x tech valuation multiples because you're a tech company or whatever.
You're talking about like WeWork.
Yeah, I mean, WeWork is amazing to watch right now because it's like a slow motion garbage fire that's just sort of happening in real time as this is all going on. But yes.
Well, I mean, I think the thing that's been so interesting to kind of look at is, and I guess this is true with Uber too, is it's like if you put a .com at the end, you're automatically worth 30x what you really should be worth. So WeWork as a real estate company was probably worth like a good $1.5 billion. It was not worth $20 billion or $30 billion or whatever, putting aside that Adam Neumann is a psychopathic lunatic.
But I think that's who they bought into. I think they bought into him as this sort of visionary, like VCs look for the founder with this that crazy thing in his eye where they have a vision and they're like, all right, he might be insane, but he might be a visionary, right? He might be the next Steve Jobs that we're looking for. And like, you're probably going to find a lot of crazy people when you're trying to use that as a funding model.
So this is part of my next question is there's this philosophy, and a lot of people have talked about this when it comes to Uber of the culture of founder worship.
Yeah.
And you kind of explore in the book a little bit Kalanick's like anti-government viewpoints and anti-authoritarian and so on, and how that kind of informs his decision making.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that and how that played out as him running the company and growing the company.
I mean, I think it's an ethos that's not uncommon in the Bay Area, and just sort of this idea that. And look, I don't think all of it is not necessarily true, but I think the idea that government is slow, there are more efficient ways of doing things, and if capitalism were sort of unbound and allowed to it's sort of like the idea of like pure free market capitalism will produce better products and more efficient systems, right? And
Peter Thiel libertarianism.
I mean, yeah, very much so. And look, I think that we're coming up against the limits of that thinking right now, but I do think that at least in my thinking around tech for a while is that it has been largely ignored by at least some of the most important companies that exist today have been largely ignored by regulators because they've been dismissed as like social networking or or ride sharing, just things that didn't immediately warrant government intervention, like a financial services company where they immediately come in. So for a while that has like really sort of thrived, but now I think they're starting to hit the limits of not having any sort of guidance or at least like limitations on that. And I think it's probably a good, or I don't want to say good, it's probably like a necessary corrective to 15, 20 years of like complete unbridled growth and like the ability to do essentially whatever you want. And now we're in this period of DC just totally hammering the Valley like in many different ways, both parties sort of just cracking down, or the FTC or DOJ sort of threatening it. And we'll probably, that pendulum will swing a little bit back towards the middle, but I think we're in this sort of corrective moment right now that's gonna be harder for them.
So speaking of this kind of founder syndrome, I'm going to say a few names to you. Tell me what they have in common. Jack Dorsey, Adam Neumann, Travis Kalanick, Ken Burns, Evan Williams, I can keep going. With the exception of Roman Emperor Mark Zuckerberg, it feels like all of them have fallen eventually. I think I do really believe that Mark Zuckerberg is the Roman Emperor reincarnate, and he figured this all out before it was going to happen to him. But what is that because these people are amazing at coming up with the ideas and building the company, but then they're terrible at running the company? Or is it because that they are amazing at coming up with the ideas and they're terrible at keeping power? Like, why is it that they all end up getting tossed out at one point or another?
I think the best, and I don't know if this is the exception. I don't know if tech is the exception or the rule, but like the best CEOs probably are able to grow and mature with the companies that they found, right? And like in some cases, weirdly, like Larry and Sergey were able to stick around as they had the professional CEO. Eric Schmidt came in and like was the grown up and ran the company, and that's been the case in some, and I feel like it's probably more often the case in non-tech industries, but I think in tech specifically, maybe it's the fact that it's so built on the mission and the founder and like the mythology of this person that built this company that there's sort of a momentum behind thinking like you're the guy, you're the person who's driving this, and you shouldn't be taken out and replaced by some suit because then it wouldn't be the same thing without you, right? It's not just like you're running PepsiCo and you can like replace whoever like with another CEO. You're fucking Jack Dorsey. You created the tweet, man. Like we can't replace you or whatever. And then you get to a point where people realize maybe you don't have the exact skill set to run whatever, $20 billion company or whatever the market cap is. And I think the best CEOs can recognize that. Some can actually grow and mature with their companies. Others cannot and are ultimately taken out by their boards.
So coming over here tonight, I asked a few people today, I said, I'm interviewing Mike on stage. What should I ask him? And 3 people told me the same question. It was not a bad question. It was actually funny that I was like, really? And it was, when will Travis Kalanick come back and run Uber again?
Oh my God.
And I thought that was kind of funny that, leading off the question, I just asked about people getting thrown out. Like people, of course, make their way back. Jack Dorsey has done it 3 times. Larry and Sergey, they pulled it off in their own way. Evan Williams almost did. Like, it's Travis, while he may be trying to disrupt how we eat our food and poison us in the process, don't put it past him. He doesn't seem like someone who's going to just go quietly into the night. Do you think, like genuinely, do you think he's going to try to make a comeback?
Yeah. This cloud kitchens thing that he's doing, so it's based in LA. It's basically, I don't know if anyone's heard of what dark kitchens are, but it's basically built entirely on food delivery apps. And the idea that you can like create little mini virtual restaurants inside of cheap real estate, and that feeds into...
They're not real restaurants.
They're not actually
They're
real.
pretend restaurants.
You can order them from the apps, and one of those apps is naturally Uber Eats, right? And so Travis it's funny because he just has this weird symbiotic attachment to the thing he originally built, and like this, okay, well, if I changed how the infrastructure of driving and delivery works, then I'm gonna start building businesses on top of that original thing. I really do, I hear varying things on, some people are like, yeah, he's doing his thing, he's trying to stay low key, and other people are like, he's not passionate about this as in the same way that he was. Like Uber was his baby, right? Like he didn't really have family or friends, or he lost his girlfriend, he lost his mom. Like a lot of Uber was the thing that was in his life, and then it was taken away from him from investors that decided to kick him out. So it's hard for me to see him not wanting to come back someday.
You seem like a little sympathetic for the guy. Is that how you feel?
I mean, it's hard to be sympathetic when someone has like $4 billion in the bank. But I don't know who's read the book in the audience, but like I think people who read the book, ex-Uber employees who are Travis like fans, were surprised that I was fairer to him than they thought I would be, and I didn't make him out to be like a total scumbag or whatever. Like I think the thing that I was aiming for, and to the point earlier, is just like I wanted to get to like, why would someone go to such lengths to do a certain thing? Why when we'd have all these headlines in 2017 that were like Uber creates this like software tool to evade authorities, or Uber's executives, there's like a bunch of murders in South America or something. Like why do they do this, right? And I really think I saw him as this weird sort of Ahab meets Icarus sort of thing, right? Where you're so fixated on this one thing that you're willing to chase this idea all the way, whether you're like branded as like a piece of shit in the eyes of the public, or alienated by all your friends and stuff. And there's something noble about that in a sense, even if you don't like it.
Don't you think about like when, just to push back a little here,
do it.
there's the story that you write about in the book where Uber moves into Brazil and people don't have credit cards in Brazil, and so they take cash, and they start getting murdered, the drivers. And there's a meeting where they're like, some people are like, we've got to stop doing this. This is crazy. We've got to stop taking cash. And Travis is like, it's going to affect our growth. Yeah. Like, that doesn't seem like someone you should be nice to.
Yeah, right. No, I do think that, and this is not a defense of that particular thing, but I do think that I was reminded of like Elon Musk when the first self-driverless car, or the driverless car death occurred, right? And the company, everyone was sort of expecting this because it's, someone's going to eventually die in a driverless car. And the statement they released was essentially like, this is going to happen at scale. We're working towards a goal that makes this, or basically pointed at, this is how many deaths happen with people behind the wheel. So just sort of the greater point being, look, we're on this sort of mission to this greater good. So this is an acceptable point.
I actually wrote about that story.
Did you really?
But in defense of Tesla, because I said 34,000 people die a year in the United States. This is a better part to the end of the story. 34,000 people die a year in the U.S. from car deaths, 1.2 million globally. And if you look statistically at the numbers, this is the first car death from a driverless car in double the period of time it would have taken a human. And Elon emailed me and said, hey, I'm about to put out a press release. Would you mind taking a look at it? And I was like, what?
Are you serious?
So I was like, I don't think that's okay.
I can't do it. Oh my God.
So anyway.
But I think that, that can be a reality and still like, you can be a human being and be like, this is a messed up thing, or we're sorry, or, I don't know. There's a thinking that rationalizes that sort of other thinking.
Here's the part for me, putting aside those things, and I can rationalize all those things. The thing that gets me is Travis is worth $4 billion. Garrett Camp is worth $4 billion. We can go through the whole list of all these people. I don't even know. Somebody said to me at one point, like, imagine if someone gave you $1 billion. You would not be able to spend it. It's really hard to spend $1 billion. And maybe, okay, so you buy a plane, it's like, 30, 40 million. You buy like 7 houses. Okay, you're at 100 million. Okay,
Travis bought 2 in LA.
In LA,
right? East side and West side.
Yeah,
Did we talk
couldn't
about
decide,
that?
Couldn't decide which side to live on.
They didn't want to commute to one side or the other. So
you've always got to have 2 houses in LA. I mean, who here doesn't?
I got to move to LA.
So they're worth all this money they could never spend. And they can't like pay the drivers more, and so that to me is the part where I'm like, okay, there's something not right here.
I mean, look, man, you worked at the New York Times. I have to like maintain a level of like distance or like.
Yes,
I get it. It's kind of awful because sometimes I just want to be like, fuck this guy, but I can't.
Donald Trump.
See,
I worked at the Times, and you're not allowed to tweet about anything, which is really hard for Mike Isaac. If you follow him on Twitter, you're not allowed to tweet about and I went to Vanity Fair, and like Graydon Carter had just like given like some speech where he's like, fuck Donald Trump, and like I was like, oh my God, I'm at the right place. It's really hard to like keep it inside. All right, last question on Uber, and then I want to ask a few more questions about Silicon Valley, and then we'll move to a Q&A. In all these stories, the board of directors seem like like the game Whack-A-Mole, and the moles never come up, and you're like, what's going on here? They're broken? Like, that's what they seem like. Because they don't want to, they're so concerned with making their millions and billions of dollars, and they don't want to upset the founder, and they don't want to get kicked off the board, and this, that, and the other. Like, at Uber, it was a whole different ballgame. It was trench warfare, everyone trying to kill each other. Can you take us in the boardroom for a minute and like explain what that culture was like?
I mean, it's a reporter's dream of a boardroom because it was just like a fucking knife fight, right? It was everyone. So a functioning, healthy board can have disagreements in private and not want to sort of like let it spill out into the public, right? You can like, maybe you have problems with whatever, like how the CEO is doing something, how the business is being run, or governance issues or questions on they had like financial committees or whatever. But by the time that Uber's board, and for years Uber's board was largely by the design of Travis, like mostly just sort of for show, right? Like he had structured it so that he essentially had power over the whole company, whether it was like shares that he held or the ability to add more directors, or so he kind of made the board irrelevant, which from the beginning is bad governance, because the whole point of a board, the CEO serves at the pleasure of a board of directors, and the board of directors have a fiduciary duty to the company itself. So when the entire enterprise is in the service of the CEO, like something's turned on its head, right? So, but in Uber, the board was largely like asleep for a very long time, just because, and this is where culpability comes in, right? Like the lines were going up and to the right, growth was going crazy, losses were crazy, but at least like you could say rides per day and revenue was going up. So there were a lot of like blind eyes turned on the types of stuff happening, I think, or the types of behavior going on. And I think people at the board level just liked being on the board of a very successful unicorn company that was growing faster than ever. And then cut to like 2017, and everyone starts pearl clutching and saying, "Oh my God, I can't believe you went to this, escort bar. I can't believe you were, hiring ex-CIA operatives to spy on your competitors," or like, just sort of a lot of things that had existed for some time and probably were willfully ignored, or at least like not something that the board members wanted to know about. And so it was a little hard for me to be like, to heroize everyone on the board, but at the same time, like towards the end, there were folks that were like, okay, well, Travis is now a liability for us. He's become, for better or worse, the figurehead of this company, and this is the guy that we got to push out. And so it was the most insane board. The fight was just in public and like totally.
That was the thing that was so crazy. When I wrote the Twitter book, there was this thing that had happened 4 years earlier that no one knew about.
Right.
With this, it was like press releases and yeah, pretty much. Last question on Uber. Have you heard? Has he read the book? Has he seen it? Has he made a comment? Has he left a really nasty review on Amazon?
There are people. I have been told that there are people writing, like systematically writing negative reviews on Amazon to bring the review down.
Been there, done that.
Which sucks, but it is what it is.
It is what it is.
I don't know if he's read it. I know people close to him have read it. I know that like when I started, I hired a fact checker to go back through all this thing, and like had to go to his people and like very systematically went through everything I was going to say, because that's what you do when you fact check. And it kicked up a lot of emotions, right? Like any ex or current Uber employee who has been through 2017, like has essentially PTSD around that era of Uber and has a hard time reading the book. And so I don't know if he's
a fact checker for his people or for Uber.
Sorry? I went to both.
Got it.
Yeah. So Uber and Travis are not one anymore, so I had to go to both. But I hope he reads it. I think it's a fair assessment. I don't think everyone thinks it's a fair assessment, but I think it's like fairer than he thought it would be.
All right, I think we have a few more minutes, and then I will move to. All right, so there's been a lot of talk about tech regulation right now from Warren and other folks, Sanders and so on, and it's what's so fascinating is this audio leaked recently from Mark Zuckerberg saying that he would go to the mat and fist fight Warren. Don't know if he'd win, but on the ground in Silicon Valley, are the people? I think there are some conservatives. There's no question.
Yes.
But there's
more closeted, but they're still
definitely more closeted. But it's predominantly liberal. It's artists, it's creators, it's designers, and so on. Do you think that there are people who would, under normal circumstances, vote for a Democrat that will vote for Trump because of the potential regulation?
I think there's a real conflict right now. I was watching so Facebook's response to that leak was to broadcast their own all hands the next week, and I do
all hands,
right, whatever they and it was like very choreographed. But I do think that Facebook has a different problem on their hands now, where there are people inside. This is a similar thing when Kavanaugh hearings were going on, right? There was legit turmoil inside of Facebook for Zuckerberg's like right-hand conservative advisor being there to support Kavanaugh at his hearing, right? And like there are people inside of Facebook who staunchly support Warren. They're like employees in the rank and file think they should be doing something about the types of stuff that Trump's campaign is putting on there. Like there's real conflict that I don't think existed inside of Facebook before. I don't like at the end of the day. I don't know where people are going to vote, or if they're going to vote with their wallets versus their whatever they're right. I mean, I honestly don't know how many people are going to shift to not necessarily the right, but at least vote for a right-wing candidate.
But at the end of the day, it's Zuck's decision, and that's what's going to fly, right?
I mean, and he's tomorrow. He's speaking at Georgetown. I have to write about this. So he's speaking at Georgetown on Facebook's whole thing is like staunchly free speech, which includes, and I don't think it's a debate with easy answers, because it includes, misinformation that you can spread across Facebook very quickly through political ads that are, Trump did this thing on Biden's son that's like all sorts of weird and wrong, but Facebook said it was going to keep it up, as well as other companies. I don't really have, clear-cut answers to it, but a lot of folks in the Valley, at least, are actually kind of, I would say the harder core free speech people are supporting Facebook and supporting Twitter, while people inside of these companies are more sort of at odds with, are we supporting, another 4 years of Donald Trump or something, which I think is hard for them to sit with them.
You spend, I think probably as a friend I can say this to you, you spend way too much time on Twitter. I don't use it that much anymore. I have a limit on my phone of 20 minutes, and I never actually hit it.
You can do that on your phone?
Yeah, you can set by app. You should set one for like 7 hours, see what happens. But the reason I don't use it is because it's a fucking cesspool, and I've tweeted like a picture of like my cute dog Pinecone that my 4-year-old named.
Sorry.
Because he's a German Shepherd, and he somehow did a word association with shepherd's pie, pine cone. Anyway,
I like it.
And you still get mean people. Like it's like, but you're on there like just ate a burger, going to the bathroom, like doing a talk. Like
those are my last 3 tweets.
Do people not give you a hard time, or do like Kevin Roos, who is a former colleague of mine, a colleague of his, he said to me at one point, I was interviewing him, and he said he stopped using Twitter, and I said why, and he said he was sitting at home. It was a Sunday morning, and he tweeted a link to a story, and all of these like Nazis started responding to him. And it was like this barrage of like white supremacists. And he was like, why am I letting these Nazis in my living room? Yeah. And he was like, I wouldn't let them in my living room if they were here knocking on the door. So he deleted the app. I'm curious, like, why, what is it for you?
Why am I letting the Nazis into my living room?
Do they come into your living room?
No, yeah.
Or do they not, and you live on a different Twitter?
I don't get a ton of Nazis. I think it's probably depends on what you're writing about. I go through different phases of it. I think it's weird. I'm gonna like echo what Zuckerberg actually says, because I think that there's a lot of awful stuff that happens as a result, not just of Twitter and not even endemic to social networks, but because of the internet, right? I really think it's an internet problem, and I also think there's enough good that I experienced through it that keeps me kind of like hoping that it can be redeemed, or like it can be something that I have as a part of my life.
You are the exception to the rule, right? I'm not. Yeah.
I mean, I don't. Look, I get people calling me.
I mean, even
stupid or whatever,
Farhad Manjoo stopped using it.
Yeah, right.
And like you guys were like the circus.
Dynamic too.
Yeah.
No, but I think so. Let me give an example of good. I think there's, or of what some people think is good. So there's a person in my book who is here in the audience tonight, who started a hashtag in the days after Uber was seen. Essentially people believed it was supporting this sort of like Trump Muslim ban, and taxis were boycotting it, and basically this guy whose name is Dan, who's right over there, I'm really glad to see, started the hashtag called Delete Uber, and the hashtag caused 500,000 people to delete their Uber accounts in like the span of like
Good job, Dan.
days. So like that, I mean, look, like I think
yes.
I do think, and there are one-off things like that are like crazy and are not the rule. I would say are probably the exception, but I do think that things like that can give me enough, whatever.
My thing, I think, with all of these companies is, to bring it back to where we started, is they create great products and they do great things, but they also don't put any effort into not doing bad things.
Yeah.
And I think that, or they put very little effort into that. And I think that my problem is that they should be rewarded for that. I'm not, I'm just saying, like, this is my personal feeling. And I once interviewed Kevin Kelly, who started Wired, and I was pushing on him. I was like, is technology good? Is it good for society? Like, are we in a better place? Like, sure, healthcare, you can say, is always a better thing, but are we in a better place today because of social media, for example? And he said his thing is that in his belief system, technology makes society 51% better and 49% worse. Every technology does something like that. And my belief is that with social media, it's the other way around. And it makes me question if we should be supporting it or questioning it, or if that's just okay.
I think that, I think it's an amplification of humanity. And like that, here's the thing, like, I don't know if
I'm going to push back on this before we wrap up. But
I don't know if we're meant to. That's
okay.
That's the sort of question that I don't know. I don't know if we're meant to be networked in that way.
It's not an implication of. This is what Mark Zuckerberg says and Jack Dorsey says. It's a mirror of society.
I'm not saying it's an exact mirror. I'm saying it's a way to have an outsized effect on.
Yes,
lots of people and a small minority of folks can have a very large effect. And the fact that they don't corral that, like, this is the thing that bothers me about Zuckerberg, is like, he just sort of says, like you said, like, he just sort of says, we're going to let it play out. These are people, take the good with the bad, but he doesn't really account for the fact that you can use these things in ways that you could not in the past to have a much greater effect on people than you otherwise would have, say, 50 years ago. And I think their rationale is, at scale, it's going to get better, or at scale, we're only going to kill 10 people, or we're going to have fewer driver deaths or whatever, but it's still fucked up, and you got to live with it, and it's worth questioning whether it's worth doing it.
On that note,
on
that happy note, we have time for a few Q's and some A's. Any questions?
All right, I will bring the microphone to anyone who has a question. Just a quick reminder around here.
Hashtag delete Twitter.
Questions, I like to say, start with a W or an H, sometimes a D. They are generally short. There is no such thing as a two-part question. And tonight, only Nick gets to ask the follow-up questions.
Oh.
Thank you. Hi. First of all, congratulations for your coverage of the Uber IPO. I believe it was flawless. Everybody really enjoyed everything that you said on Twitter.
Thank you so much.
My question.
She likes my Twitter.
I do like it.
How much did he pay you to come here today?
I do use Twitter, and I really enjoy all your tweets. Now, what was your impression when you saw TK walking the floor with his father and the Uber IPO, and then meeting with Ryan and Garrett?
That was a super weird morning. It was, I think Travis was,
Just to put it into context
yeah.
for people listening, that it was the morning of the IPO, and Travis Kalanick it was the first time he'd been seen in public, right? For a while.
yeah, for the most part. And like, there was all this drama behind the scenes. I mean, there was drama behind like whether he would get to like go up and ring the bell and be on the podium. And I mean, it's very much not even first world problems, like 0.1% problems, right? But like he and Dara, the new CEO, wasn't going to let him up there. So there, it was supposed to be this display of like sweet, founders coming together, and part of it kind of was, but also some people felt soured on the whole thing that, Travis was essentially pouting that he wasn't able to get on the podium and ring the bell. And look, I think you could argue that the guy made a lot of the company, maybe even though there's a lot that he did wrong that you could let him up there, but I think it did not go the way anyone wanted that day to go for a number of different reasons, and no one left happy. But it was all like this weird subtext where there's weird passive-aggressive feelings. The story of Uber is like unsaid passive-aggressive feelings.
First of all, yeah, it's a great book, Mike, and Nick, loved the book about the Bitcoin guy, not the Bitcoin guy, Silk Road guy.
Silk Road, yep.
Silk Road, right?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that's really fascinating is Lyft employs, I feel like a lot of the same tactics. They have a pretty similar business, and yet they are so sheltered from any sort of media criticism.
Yeah.
And sort of what I think is interesting is, Lyft and Uber almost merged there for a second.
Yep.
How do you think, ride sharing would be different had that taken place? And what do you think do you think Lyft is as bad as Uber? How do you compare the two?
Yeah, no. It's a really great point. I think Lyft was brilliant in casting itself as the hero because, like, they're the same company, essentially, right? Like,
Well, same company with a little different
With-
personality.
with
Like if you would have written the Lyft book, it would have been called Tickled Pink or something like that, rather than Super
but
Bump.
they have okay. So internal sort of cultural dynamics aside, I think if your main grievance with Uber is the way they treat drivers or the way they sort of yank around people on pay scales, I think that it's hard to argue that they're better than Uber in that regard.
Yeah, totally.
And so them just sort of saying like we're your cuddly pink brother was brilliant branding because like, and again, this is part of it's like indicting the media or indicting my own like way of like thinking about it or covering it or writing about it is like they cast themselves as a hero and it seemed to have worked, right? And I also think I think they're small enough that people didn't they weren't as easy of a target or weren't as important of a target to go after versus Uber, and I think that is interesting in and of itself. It would have been fascinating. There was a point at Uber almost bought Lyft. Too bad like John and Travis hate each other and never would have like been able to work together. But if that were to happen, like it's so fast. Like there would be, I don't know, maybe Uber would have been closer to profitability now because they still have to spend subsidy wars to get people to come over from Lyft. It's like a really weird alternative future that I honestly can't imagine. But to your point, like I think Lyft probably gets a lot less scrutiny just because they're the smaller player and they're not branded like the dirtbag that Uber is. That's not fair.
Just a quick shill, Mike. Love your Twitter. I kind of missed the quips
What is
between you and
this?
Fuck
Farhad.
you, Nick. That's right. My Twitter
I'm just saying the quips between him and Farhad. I kind of missed that. But first of all, congratulations on getting the book turned into a show. That's something that
Thank
Oh, yeah,
as
we
soon
said
as
that's
I read
right.
it,
And about
Thank you
round
so
of applause
much.
for that.
Yeah, thank you.
I was hoping that would happen.
Mike's gonna play Travis.
I do have a question related to that. First, you didn't mention, I saw in your conversations with creators that there was a DM that happened and how it came about.
Oh.
So I just wanted to, I did my digging. I just wanted to know like how that, concept came about. And two, will you be narrating the show? Because the quips you have in the book are like half the reason that I just kind of kept going. It's
Oh,
the
man.
Thank that
Thank you so
don't really
much.
see much nowadays.
That's really kind of you to say. So yeah, it's funny. So today, literally today, as I land in LA this morning, Showtime decides to fucking put a press release out without telling me which is fine, but it
0.1% problem.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, sorry, this is bad. But I'm super excited. We're gonna Showtime is optioning it. Brian Koppelman and David Levian, who write Billions, are the writers, and so it was just the way I wrote it really felt. I felt like I wanted to see it on screen. Like I wanted to write it very visually. I mean, you inspired sort of how I wanted to do it. Like,
Thanks.
They're all characters. There's scenes. There's people. Like it just feels like a movie or a TV show anyway. And so and I think I just got lucky in that. Like I've been following Brian Koppelman for a long time on Twitter, and we just sort of been pals. And then after he got it, he DM'd me, and things just sort of, went from there. And I'm glad it worked out. I'm very glad it worked out. Like it was a interesting process. But I don't know. I don't know what so they have to finish this next season of Billions, and then we're gonna hopefully get to work on it pretty soon. But I get to be involved, so I'm not sure what that's going to look like, but I'm excited to do it, and can't wait for you guys to see it. I can't wait to hopefully bring it to TV.
First of all, congratulations on your timely and entertaining book and your imminent entrance into premium television.
Thank you.
Do not give him a shout out for his Twitter.
I really enjoy the Twitter, to be honest. We're all, the limited time.
Great audience.
You mentioned the subsidy war coming off of the Lyft question, and I feel like there's a lot of talk about all these rides are artificially cheap to edge people out of the marketplace, but both companies are IPOing. Do you see Uber and Lyft in this just sort of mortal struggle until one of them dies?
Right.
Or is there going to be an equilibrium that we'll reach at some point?
Or do they buy Lyft?
Do they merge or something like that? I don't know if that would, although I don't know if they care about tech companies the ride-hailing companies, the FTC.
Well, just on that question, I remember Facebook was terrified that Twitter was going to fail because they needed that competition for regulatory reasons, so they could buy things like Instagram. Is
That's really interesting. That you need a sort of foil, and I do think so. I think to your point, I think they do hit a kind of equilibrium. Everything kind of goes in waves. I'll talk to people inside of Uber that says, Lyft is spinning like crazy in LA right now. They can't keep these subsidies up because they're losing X dollars per ride, and we can't match them if we want to actually have a profitable business. I don't think, the last I heard is that the ride-hailing business for Uber, the losses are starting to abate slightly more. But maybe in a rosy vision of the future, you get to some sort of equilibrium where they aren't constantly selling $10 rides for $5 and burning money by the barrel. The problem is their entire new area of revenue growth is on food delivery. And food delivery is food delivery is where we were 5 years ago with ride hailing. It's just an enormous cash suck, and everyone is again subsidizing each delivery, the cost of each delivery to grow user growth and to grow revenue. And right now, again, I want someone to write a book on SoftBank because they've sort of messed up the economics of all this and are essentially funding companies that might have died before, right? DoorDash just got a giant couple $billion slug, something like that. It's their valuation is $11 billion.
Don't even get me started on DoorDash.
Yeah. A lot of people in the Valley think DoorDash is not worth $11 billion. They're losing money on many of their deliveries. So I think delivery is the next bubble that we're going to see around this, and there's going to be some huge flameouts, and I'm very curious what that's going to look like. But how do you get to an equilibrium if you're always kicking the can down the road on profitability when you're burning cash to get to your revenue growth up? And I don't know. I don't know the answer.
Is part of that equilibrium for a place so I've always been wondered is Uber eventually, so what Uber did was, it wasn't the fact that they were to give you a ride, that they were giving you a ride somewhere. It was that they were connecting you with someone that was going to do that.
Sure.
So you weren't paying for the taxi to show up at your house. You were paying for that person who called the taxi and got them there to your house. And now you're paying for this app who calls your neighbor to give you a ride to the airport. Eventually, when it's driverless cars, why do you need Uber? Why can't you just call your neighbor's Tesla?
The different.
And so is part of that the hope that they get to a point where it's a driverless car world or semi-driverless, and that they can control it that way?
I'm still skeptical on driver. Well, first of all, I think we overshot like the estimations of when driverless cars are gonna just
Agreed.
functioning, right? Like, I think that's just how the hype cycle works, and the automakers and everyone was like, yeah, within 5 years, and it's like been 3 years, and there's zero chance they're gonna come in the next 2 years. So I think there's that.
If you actually want to have a good laugh, you should go online and look up some of the summon Tesla 3 videos where people are summoning the cars and they're driving over medians and like knocking over old ladies. They're amazing. It's literally just like drunk people driving a driverless car.
That's great. But I think the other thing that I think is probably understated or whatever is there are a lot of costs that, like right now, Uber doesn't own any of the actual stuff that it takes to get somewhere in a ride. They don't own the car, they don't own driver, they don't own real estate to hold those things, right? Like driverless does come with a lot of costs that are not immediately solved, that you have to sort of like building an entire fleet of driverless cars costs a lot of money, right? And this whole other point of research that they're doing, also researching robotics to make them work costs a lot of money. So I just think there are a lot of costs that are not being accounted for that seem to be wished away by the idea that driverless is going to solve everything. And I don't think we're there on technologically or financially or especially regulatory like level, and it's going to be a while.
I haven't gotten to the end of the book, so sorry if this is at the end. I'm like 75% through. I'm just curious how you feel, like how far Uber's come, like looking at it today, just given that, you know, since kind of 2017, you have Dara, you have new leadership, it's now a platform, it's the Amazon. So like, you know, I think they would probably say it's a complete 180, it's a new company, and it's just kind of this old reputation that's following us, and we're actually a new company.
Right.
I'm curious how you perceive it. Is it the old company with, you know, a new face, or have they actually fundamentally changed and it's a new company moving forward? I'm just curious about that.
Good question.
I think, I think there's, again, I go back to this PTSD example, but I think when you're like so closely scrutinized and have so much sort of real pain that you went through in 2017, I feel people are too scared to even think about acting up in different ways. So it's sort of a prophecy that doesn't even need Dara to fulfill it, you know, in some ways. But also, you know, there have been a number of folks that have cycled out. There have been a lot of people who have left Uber to go to Travis's new thing. There are people who have gone to Lime, the scooter thing from Uber, which is funny. That's a whole other thing. There's been like a decent amount of cycling, and there are people who are just like, I can't do that. They lost a lot of people in 2017. Their attrition really went through the roof for a long time, and now they're cutting folks, right? So I do think there's been enough cycling over time that you don't have the exact same workforce. At the same time, I think the problem now is sort of ironic in that people are starting to complain that Dara isn't visionary enough, right? Or like he's like a little too boring or a little too dad or just like chill in a way that Travis wasn't, that they weirdly miss. Like it's like you know, again, for all his faults, Travis was really able to rally employees around him and like put this sort of fire and energy into people that I think, you know, sometimes comes with the authority of being a founder or the person who's sort of leading the charge. And the meme that I hear now is again along those lines. Is Travis going to make a comeback, or do we need someone like that, or is Dara like not like enough of a hype man to get us up? You know, so I mean, it's funny because it's only been 2 years, but.
That's like a lifetime. You want to hear my theory?
Yeah, do it.
Here's my theory. So when Jack Dorsey was fired from Twitter, he went off and he didn't start Square. It's another fallacy that he did. But he went off and he got involved with Square and he eventually took over Square. And he went to Twitter and he said, I want you to buy Square and then I'll come run the place. And the idea, which was actually very smart, was that you would be able to pay with Twitter. So you would be able to, like, you're at Mike Isaac or at Nick Bilton would be like how you would pay for things. So very
Kind of Venmo, proto Venmo. Right?
proto Venmo.
That's cool.
They didn't do that, but he ends up coming back. Do you think that there's a world where Travis is thinking, I know that the future, I ran this place, I know the future of this business is Uber Eats and those other delivery platforms. I'm going to start this company, make them buy me, and come back and take over?
I mean, it's sort of like, eBay and PayPal, once like a thing gets dependent enough on another thing. This is exactly why people are nervous about why Travis is in this exact space. Like, he's building something on top of the existing platform that was there. And once you get to, again, it's still small days, but like, if this thing actually works, or you get to a point where it's actually dependent on this as a revenue stream, that becomes a liability. It would be fascinating to see that happen.
Hey, Mike, big fan of your Twitter too.
I am vindicated.
Can I throw this microphone at someone? Am I allowed to do that?
Yeah, the funniest thing that I found while reading your book was how Uber is still dealing with some problems with their drivers, especially like the contract worker bill. And I'm curious, I've been in Ubers and Lyft since and kind of asked drivers how they feel about those protections that are being come, and a lot of them are just like, oh, I don't want to deal with that.
Yeah.
Or like, I'm wondering what your opinion is on that, and do you think Dara is kind of all show by coming out and saying that Uber drivers are not like integral part of the business, which I thought was really funny.
I mean, it's. I will say, like, I don't think it's unilaterally decided by all drivers that they want this. I feel like I was on a radio show the other day, and they were asking drivers to call in, and like half the calls were from drivers who were like, I don't want to be an employee, right? Like, this is the whole point of this is my flexibility, and I don't like I just want to be a contractor. This is a whole thing. I think for people who are really supportive of labor rights and the idea that, labor rights activists have fought for a very long time to get some minimum level of protections, then like the needs of maybe any one individual might be superseded by like the greater sort of thing that they're fighting for, if that makes sense. But I do think it's very split, because the whole nature and the whole sell of Uber is that you can, and to their credit, you can do it, you can log on when you want, and you can stop when you don't want to do it, and that's been the most attractive thing for every driver. So I do think it's really split. I also think it's funny for them to say that drivers are not core to their business model, because it's like total BS, like lawyer line when they have to sort of bring that to court. That said, like it's if all the drivers got turned into employees, like that would be, that's like just fundamental to their business, is offloading all of the costs onto the drivers, right? So they're gonna have to argue some very creative arguments to get out of that.
Mike, thank you so much. The book is Tickled Pink, The Battle for Lyft.
Thank you.
Just kidding.
Thank you. Thanks, man. Thank you.